We continue to follow breaking news tonight on the search for a missing toddler in Owen County. Here she is, 14-month-old Shaylyn Ammerman. She was last seen last night at a home in Spencer.
Police say there were no signs of forced entry, but her father believes someone abducted his daughter right from her own crib.
We woke up that morning today and went to go see if Shaylyn was there, and she was gone. They have no idea where. I'm thinking somebody that has a big grudge over my family. I don't know what kind of grudge would have against my family. I mean, my family is the most peaceful people in the world.
Investigators are interviewing several witnesses and persons of interest at this very hour. They're also searching a few homes and cars as well. Now, officers tell us they will not go home until they find little Shaylyn.
We have been following this story since this afternoon, and now hours later, Shaylyn Ammerman is still missing.
State police tell us there are several persons of interest in this case, and they will not stop until Shaylyn is found. RTV6's Chance Walser joins us live in Spencer now. He spoke to the mother. Chance?
Jessica Stewart says little Shaylyn can walk, but she certainly doesn't believe that she climbed out of her crib and left on her own. Neither do police, and as they guard the scene of her disappearance tonight and search the area, they do so believing firmly that her life is in danger.
She's a happy baby. Anytime any kind of music comes on the TV, she's bobbing her head, stomping around, dancing.
And tonight, on behalf of that little girl, an Owen County mother has a simple and potent request.
Please bring her home. She needs her mom.
Bring her home. She's ours, not yours. Those words came from a desperate family in a quiet Indiana town. A town where people trusted one another, where doors were rarely locked, and where the sudden disappearance of a toddler felt unthinkable. As the morning sun rose over Spencer, Indiana, one home was frozen in shock. A crib that should have cradled a smiling child lay empty. A blanket still carried warmth, but the little girl was gone. In an instant, an ordinary night had turned into a nightmare. Within hours, the search began. Police officers crowded narrow streets, their vehicles flashing blue and red in the early light. Helicopters roared overhead, shadows racing across farmland and woods. Dogs followed every trace, while neighbors left their daily routines behind to comb through fields, riverbanks, and back roads. From porches and sidewalks, whispers spread quickly. If she was safe in her bed just hours earlier, how could she vanish without anyone noticing? This wasn't just a missing child case. It was the kind of betrayal that cuts deepest, harm that came from within a circle of trust. Before we continue, a warning. This case involves the tragic loss of a young life. We will share the facts carefully and respectfully, but the subject may still be difficult for some viewers. To our new viewers, welcome. Please subscribe and share where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. And to our returning viewers, thank you. Every like, comment, and share helps spread awareness and strengthen prevention. What followed would unravel a family, shake a community, and expose just how fragile safety becomes when trust is broken. Shaylyn Ammerman was born on December 31st, 2014 in Bloomington, Indiana. She was a New Year's baby, arriving just as the world welcomed another year. For her father, Justin Ammerman, she was his first child. For her mother, Jessica Stewart, she was the youngest, joining two older brothers, Gage and Blay, from Jessica's earlier relationships. From the very beginning, Shaylyn became the light of her family's lives. She was remembered as a joyful child, the kind of baby who found happiness in the simplest things. Family members often recalled how her face would brighten when music played, how she bobbed her head to jingles on television, stomping her little feet as though every tune was meant just for her. Those around her described her as easygoing, playful, and quick to laugh. A child whose presence seemed to fill a room with warmth. Her living arrangements reflected the reality of many families today. After her parents separated, Shaylyn split her time between households. She spent part of the week with her mother, Jessica, and her brothers. The other part she spent with her father, Justin, who lived in Spencer, Indiana, about an hour away from Bloomington. This arrangement allowed both parents to remain involved in her upbringing, and it also meant Shaylyn was surrounded by a wide circle of caregivers. At her father's home in Spencer, the person most often tending to her was her grandmother, Tamara Morgan. Tamara adored her first granddaughter, speaking often of how easy she was to care for. Alongside Tamara was her husband, Danny Morgan, Shaylyn's step-grandfather, and Justin's brother, Adam Ammerman. Also staying in the home at the time was a woman named Kelly Rogers, who had moved in with the family. To many, this looked like a strong support system. Multiple adults were present, each playing a role in looking after Shaylyn when she was in Spencer. But what gave comfort and stability also carried an unseen risk. The larger the circle of people around a child, the more doors there are for trust to be extended, and sometimes that trust can be misplaced. Shaylyn's life was filled with joy, family, and laughter. She was at the heart of two households, loved deeply by parents, siblings, and grandparents alike. Her story is a reminder of how children thrive in the embrace of extended families, but also how such openness, while well-intentioned, can unknowingly expose them to dangers no one anticipates. At the center of the investigation stood Kyle Parker, a 22-year-old man with no blood relation to the Ammerman family, yet a familiar presence in their home. He was known mainly through his casual friendship with Adam Ammerman, Shaylyn's uncle. Kyle often visited to drink, watch television, and pass the time. In a town where everyone seemed to know everyone, he was not viewed as an outsider, but treated as though he belonged to the circle. Kyle's background revealed a young man drifting between places. At the time, he had been staying with Tina and her husband, Mr. Wagner, in nearby Gosport, a town only a few miles from Spencer. He helped them with odd jobs, painting a garage, or doing small tasks for cash. He did not have a steady career or a fixed home, and his pattern of moving between friends' houses made him someone who lived on the edges of other people's routines. Despite this instability, his outward behavior did not raise alarms. To Tamara Morgan, Shaylyn's grandmother, Kyle came across as polite, respectful, even gentle. She recalled moments where he had interacted with the baby, once even rocking her back to sleep when she woke in the night. Those small acts of apparent kindness shaped how the family perceived him, as a harmless acquaintance, someone trustworthy enough to have around their child. In Spencer, a town of just over 2,000 residents, this kind of trust was common. People left their doors unlocked, children played outside, and neighbors were expected to look out for one another. Within this environment, Kyle blended easily. The Ammermans, like many small-town families, never imagined danger would come from someone who had been welcomed inside their home. This misplaced confidence would later reveal the most devastating lesson. Threats are not always from strangers lurking outside. They can emerge quietly from within the very circle where trust is given most freely. In the hours leading up to Shaylyn's disappearance, the Ammerman household was far from quiet. On the night of March 22, 2016, her uncle Adam Ammerman, still feeling the effects of drinking the previous evening, decided to invite his acquaintance Kyle Parker over. The plan was simple: sit in Adam's bedroom, drink whiskey, and watch television. It was not unusual for Parker to stop by, and his presence did not raise concern among the family. Elsewhere in the house, life followed a familiar routine. Around 10 p.m., Shaylyn's grandmother Tamara Morgan dressed her granddaughter in her pajamas and laid her in the crib that had been set up in the living room. She ensured her blanket was tucked around her, checked that her pacifier was nearby, and left her resting peacefully. A short while later, her father, Justin Ammerman, bent down to kiss her goodnight, whispering words of affection before leaving her to sleep. The evening continued with Adam and Parker drinking and talking, while Adam's stepfather, Danny Morgan, moved in and out of the room. For most of the night, the baby remained undisturbed in her crib. At around 1:30 a.m., before heading to bed herself, Tamara went to check on her granddaughter. She later recalled that everything appeared normal. Shaylyn was sound asleep, breathing steadily, with nothing to suggest that the night would be anything but ordinary. Sometime after, Adam drifted off to sleep in his room. In the early hours of the morning, he awoke briefly to the sound of the front door. Through the window, he noticed Parker walking toward his car. In his drowsy state, Adam thought he glimpsed something in Parker's arms, though he could not be certain. He called out, asking where Parker was going, but received no reply. Parker got into his car and drove away. By the time dawn broke over Spencer, the scene inside the house looked unchanged. The furniture sat in its place, the doors were locked as usual, and silence hung in the air. But in the crib where a child had been tucked in only hours before, there was now nothing but absence. By sunrise, nothing in the house had changed, except the child was gone. On the morning of March 23, 2016, the Ammerman home was struck by the kind of moment every parent fears. Justin Ammerman walked into the living room where his daughter's crib had been placed and found it empty. The blanket that had been tucked around her was gone, as was her pacifier. In shock, he ran to his mother, Tamara Morgan, asking if she had taken the child. She had not. Panic set in almost immediately. Tamara's words captured the fear and disbelief. Somebody came in and took her. At 9 a.m., the call was placed to 911. Within minutes, the case was treated with the highest urgency. Indiana State Police, alongside local officers from Spencer, mobilized in force. Patrol cars lined the streets. Officers moved through neighborhoods, knocking on doors and asking questions. Helicopters took to the skies, circling over farm fields and dense woods. Search dogs were deployed, trained to follow even the faintest trace. Teams scanned the White River with sonar, while volunteers from the community formed search lines through fields and along riverbanks. The disappearance transformed Spencer overnight. Neighbors left their homes to join the search, combing through back roads and ditches, refusing to stop as daylight slipped away. This was not the kind of town where a toddler vanished without a trace. For a community where trust was second nature, suspicion now lurked at every corner. Despite the large-scale mobilization, there was one question that quickly became controversial. Why was there no Amber Alert issued? Authorities explained that the case did not meet the criteria at the time. To issue an Amber Alert, officials required either a confirmed abduction with suspect details or information on a vehicle that could be used to spread the alert statewide. In Shaylyn's case, they had neither. No clear suspect, no car, no definitive lead. By the book, the criteria were not satisfied. For many, this explanation felt hollow. Families and community members questioned how a system designed to protect the most vulnerable could fail to activate in such a critical moment. Some described it as a gap in the net, a system that, in following rigid rules, left a child without the loudest alarm that could have been sounded. If you believe every missing child deserves the widest possible alert, take a moment to subscribe. Because what investigators discovered next shows how quickly hours can turn into tragedy. From the moment Shaylyn was reported missing, the Ammerman home became the center of an intensive investigation. Police immediately interviewed every person who had been inside the house the night before. Justin Ammerman, the child's father, Tamara Morgan, her grandmother, Danny Morgan, Tamara's husband, Adam Ammerman, Justin's brother, and Kelly Rogers, a woman who was staying in the home. Detectives asked each person to account for their movements. To verify these statements, several of them were given polygraph examinations. Adam's results showed no signs of deception, and investigators publicly ruled him out. Others in the home were also cleared in this way. Suspicion quickly shifted toward Kyle Parker, the 22-year-old who had been drinking with Adam that night. Detectives noticed fresh scratches on his arms. When asked about them, Parker insisted they came from a cat. Investigators noted the explanation, but did not accept it at face value. As his questioning continued, Parker's story began to change. At first, he claimed he left the Ammerman house around 1:15 a.m., but under pressure, he altered his timeline, admitting he had stayed later than he originally said. This inconsistency became a key focus. What sealed Parker's place at the center of the investigation was something he said outside the interrogation room. During a smoke break with his stepfather, Mike Patton, Parker reportedly stated that the truth would come out once Shaylyn's body was found. Patton, alarmed, immediately reported this to police. Confronted again, Parker eventually agreed to show investigators where to look. He drew a map pointing to an isolated stretch near Gosport, close to the White River. To explain himself, he claimed that he and Adam Ammerman had discovered Shaylyn unresponsive inside the home and had decided to move her. Detectives carefully examined this account against the statements they had already collected. Adam's polygraph results had come back clean, and his timeline showed no involvement. Investigators determined Parker's version of events was another attempt to shift blame away from himself. Yet the map could not be ignored. It directed police to a very specific location, one Parker should not have known unless he had direct involvement. It was the most concrete lead authorities had in a case that, until then, had been built on contradictions and speculation. For detectives, the picture was clear. They had a suspect who had changed his story repeatedly, who had been the last person seen leaving the house, and who was now guiding them to a remote area where he claimed answers could be found. With the community on edge and search teams stretched across the county, investigators prepared to follow Parker's directions. What they uncovered there would confirm their worst fears. And it was at that remote spot by the river that the search for Shaylyn reached its heartbreaking conclusion. On the afternoon of March 24, 2016, the desperate search for Shaylyn Ammerman came to a devastating conclusion. Acting on information provided by Kyle Parker, investigators moved toward a wooded stretch outside Gosport, near where Indian Creek meets the White River. The location was remote, bordered by dense brush and hidden from the casual eye, a place far removed from the home where Shaylyn had last been seen. Roughly 36 hours after her disappearance, officers made the discovery that everyone had feared. Shaylyn's body was found near a downed tree along the river's edge. Close to the site, detectives noticed a burn pile. Sifting through the ashes, they found remnants believed to be parts of her clothing and a small blanket. These traces matched what relatives had reported missing from her crib. It was a heartbreaking confirmation that hope of bringing her home alive was gone. In a painful misstep, news of the discovery reached the media before Shaylyn's family had been formally informed. Broadcasts across Indiana carried the announcement that a body matching her description had been recovered. Members of the Ammerman family, still waiting for official word, learned of her death through television reports and phone calls, compounding their grief and leaving them feeling sidelined in their moment of loss.
This is breaking news from Channel 13.
That man, Kyle, is 22-year-old Kyle Parker of Spencer, the man now in custody in Owen County. Police arrested him after finding the body of Shaylyn Ammerman. The 15-month-old with blue eyes and a beautiful smile is now gone.
Her body was discovered tonight right near the White River, and that location was near Gosport, where police were led there by witness information. Now, the area is not too far from little Shaylyn's home in Spencer.
Our crews were in that rural area tonight as police ended their search after finding the body, but they are not done. Eyewitness News reporter David McAnally is in Spencer with more on the arrest, what police found, and why the investigation continues.
Put out in the news release already, a body of a female infant has been discovered near Gosport. That body did match the description of Shaylyn Ammerman. That body was located in a remote area just northeast of Gosport along the White River, actually where Indian Creek meets the White River.
To say this, but Kyle or whoever is
And he's in custody
is the cause of it. I hope the wrath of God comes on him.
An arrest has been made in connection with this case. Kyle Parker, age 22, of Spencer.
Speak plain and clearly. Whoever did this needs to burn in hell.
To recap this breaking news, police have found the body of 15-month-old Shaylyn Ammerman near Gosport, near the White River. This follows 2 days of massive searches after the toddler disappeared from her father's home near Spencer. 22-year-old Kyle Parker is now in police custody in connection with this case. An autopsy is planned for tomorrow, and we will have another update coming up in just a few minutes here.
The following day, Shaylyn's body was transported to Louisville, Kentucky, for a complete forensic autopsy conducted by Dr. Donna Stewart, a pediatric pathologist with the state medical examiner's office. Her findings were stark and left no doubt about what had occurred. Dr. Stewart determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation, meaning Shaylyn's breathing had been forcibly cut off until she could no longer survive. In simple terms, asphyxiation occurs when oxygen is prevented from reaching the body's vital organs, leading to suffocation. But the autopsy revealed even more devastating news. The medical examination showed that Shaylyn had also been sexually assaulted before her death. The injuries documented during the examination were severe and consistent with violent abuse. Dr. Dye Stewart later testified that it was the worst case she had seen in her professional career. Court documents confirm that the extent of these injuries shocked investigators, prosecutors, and medical professionals alike. These findings carried heavy legal weight. They established that Shaylyn's death was not only a homicide, but one involving sexual assault, which meant prosecutors could pursue additional charges of rape and child molestation against Kyle Parker. This shaped the entire trajectory of the case. Yet even with the autopsy's conclusive findings, the prosecution faced a serious obstacle. There was no DNA evidence directly tying Parker to the crime. Forensic analysis came back without a genetic link. Items that could have held critical trace evidence, including clothing and a blanket, had been destroyed in a burn pile, leaving investigators with gaps they could not fill. What remained were Parker's own incriminating remarks, the map he had drawn that led investigators to Shaylyn's body, and the timeline that placed him as the last person seen leaving the home. The autopsy confirmed the crime, but the fight for accountability would depend on whether these surrounding pieces could hold up in court. For the community, however, the grim details mattered less than the loss itself. As word spread, Spencer was overcome with sorrow. Vigils formed almost immediately. Residents placed candles in windows, businesses displayed signs of remembrance, and families tied pink and purple ribbons, Shaylyn's favorite colors, to fences, trees, and storefronts. The discovery of Shaylyn's body and the confirmation from the autopsy shifted the case from a frantic search to a pursuit of justice. For investigators, the focus now turned to ensuring that the person they believed responsible could be held accountable in a court of law, despite the fragile evidence they had to build upon. On March 28, 2016, just days after the discovery of Shaylyn Ammerman's body, prosecutors announced a sweeping set of charges against Kyle Parker. He was formally charged with murder, kidnapping, child molestation, and rape. The case immediately drew statewide attention. For many, the charges reflected the full scope of what the autopsy had revealed. For prosecutors, it was the first step in what would prove to be a long and difficult legal battle. Over the course of the following year, the courtroom became a testing ground for what the state could actually prove. Owen County prosecutor Donald Vandermoor faced an uphill fight. On paper, the charges were severe, but the evidence had troubling weaknesses. There was no DNA conclusively linking Parker to the crime. Much of the potential forensic evidence had been destroyed in a burn pile. And while Parker had made incriminating remarks and directed investigators to the site where Shaylyn was found, those admissions alone could not guarantee a conviction on every charge. The state also faced a credibility problem. Some of the witnesses tied to Parker's activities in the days surrounding the crime carried prior criminal histories, making their testimony vulnerable to attack. In legal terms, they were impeachable, meaning a defense attorney could undermine their reliability before a jury. Vandermoor had to weigh whether taking the case to trial carried the risk of acquittal on the most serious counts. By early 2017, after months of negotiations and assessments, a plea deal was reached. In February 2017, Parker pleaded guilty to murder and kidnapping. In exchange, the charges of rape and child molestation were dropped. For the prosecution, the deal ensured that Parker would serve a lengthy sentence and that the case would not collapse under the weight of its evidentiary weaknesses. For Shaylyn's family, it felt like an incomplete form of justice. The most horrific aspects of what the autopsy revealed would never be addressed by a jury. The sentencing took place before Judge Lori Thatcher Quillen. She condemned Parker's actions, describing them as pure evil. Under Indiana law, Parker received a 60-year sentence. State statutes require those convicted of murder to serve at least 75% of their sentence. That means Parker will spend a minimum of 45 years in prison, making his earliest possible release date around 2061, when he would be in his late 60s. One decision added to the community's anger. Parker was not required to register as a sex offender. Because the sexual assault charges were dismissed as part of the plea, his legal status was reduced to that of a violent felon.
The charging documents detailed the violent rape of 1-year-old Shaylyn Ammerman, causing the coroner to call this the worst case of sexual trauma she had seen in her career. 22-year-old Kyle Parker now faces 8 different charges, including rape, murder, and child molesting. Family members called Kyle Parker a friend who had been over at Shaylyn's father's house last Tuesday night drinking booze and watching TV. According to new court documents, Parker allegedly took Shaylyn Ammerman from the home early Wednesday morning, raped her in his car, and then drove to Gosport, where he dumped her body near the White River. Court documents show Parker confessed to what he did to his stepdad and said he killed Shaylyn by covering her mouth with a cloth. Parker also covered Shaylyn with bleach in the hope of destroying DNA. Now, court records read Parker showed investigators on a map where they could find Shaylyn's body, but he initially told investigators that Shaylyn was dead inside the father's house and the child's uncle wanted to get rid of the body and that he only drove the car. However, the uncle passed a polygraph test when saying that he was not involved.
To many, this was a failure of the justice system. In the eyes of the court, the plea deal brought the case to a close. But for Shaylyn's family and the broader community, it left open wounds. The outcome exposed a painful truth about the justice system, that it does not always deliver the full measure of accountability families expect. Sometimes, it delivers only what prosecutors believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. This outcome became a sobering lesson. In cases where evidence is fragile, the law often settles for certainty of punishment, even if it means leaving part of the truth legally unacknowledged.
We do have new details now. This morning we learned about the services for Shaylyn. Her family and community will celebrate her short life this Wednesday. There's a visitation at the Christian Life Center in Spencer starting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That will run up to the funeral service, which will start at 7 p.m. Shaylyn was just 15 months old.
On March 30th, 2016, just a week after Shaylyn's disappearance, her funeral was held at the Christian Life Center in Spencer. The service drew people from every part of the community. Family members sat in the front rows, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had been touched by her story. Among those present were the officers who had searched for her day and night. They attended a private viewing beforehand, paying their respects to the child whose case had left a mark on their lives. Outside the church, the sense of loss stretched far beyond the family. Hundreds of townspeople gathered, some standing quietly with flowers, others holding candles. The town of Spencer had turned itself into a living memorial. Across neighborhoods, pink and purple porch lights, Shaylyn's favorite colors, glowed in the evenings. They shone from homes, storefronts, and schools, becoming a silent show of unity and mourning. Local businesses placed signs in their windows, and schools held moments of silence and small vigils where children and teachers prayed together. The community was shaken, but they rallied around the family in an effort to ensure Shaylyn would not be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, the tragedy sparked deeper conversations. Residents became more cautious about who was welcomed into their homes. Parents and grandparents who had always assumed Spencer was a safe place began to reconsider how easily trust was extended. Informal neighborhood watches formed, and families started talking more openly about child safety and vigilance. Yet despite the outward signs of unity, a haunting question lingered. In quiet conversations, many still asked, "How could this happen here?" The tragedy of Shaylyn Ammerman is not only remembered for the loss itself, but for the lessons it revealed about trust, systems, and accountability. This was not a case of a stranger appearing out of the dark. It was a betrayal from within, committed by someone who had been welcomed into the family's home, treated as part of the circle. It is a reminder that harm often hides behind familiarity, and that trust, while essential in any community, must be paired with caution and boundaries. The case also exposed a critical systemic gap. No Amber Alert was issued because the strict criteria required specific details, a suspect description or vehicle information that investigators did not yet have. By following the rulebook, authorities missed an opportunity to broadcast Shaylyn's disappearance more widely. This gap raised serious questions about whether the system designed to protect children is flexible enough when minutes matter most. In court, another limitation surfaced. Prosecutors knew what the autopsy showed. They knew Parker's statements and contradictions. But they also knew that a trial requires evidence, not suspicion. Without DNA and with witnesses whose credibility could be attacked, the most serious charges risked falling apart before a jury. This tension between truth and proof left the community with the painful sense that justice had been incomplete. The takeaways from Shaylyn's case are clear. Parents and caregivers must set firm boundaries, even with people who seem trustworthy. Communities must strengthen prevention education, encouraging vigilance even in small towns where trust feels natural. And lawmakers must review child safety alert thresholds to ensure that no case falls through the cracks of a rigid system. Today, Shaylyn's name endures not just as a symbol of tragedy, but as a call for reform. A reminder that awareness, prevention, and accountability are the only ways to protect the most vulnerable among us. Shaylyn Ammerman's life was heartbreakingly brief, but the lessons her case left behind continue to echo. Her story reminds us that safety requires vigilance, even in places that feel the most secure, and that justice requires reform, because systems designed to protect can fail when they are bound by limits or weakened by gaps in evidence. In Spencer, Indiana, her memory has never faded. Porch lights still glow in shades of pink and purple, the colors chosen to honor her. Vigils are held, prayers are spoken, and her smile is recalled by those who loved her. For a town that once believed it was immune to such tragedy, Shaylyn became a symbol of both sorrow and resolve. A reminder that no community is untouched, and no family should ever feel this kind of loss. If you believe every child deserves protection and every family deserves answers, subscribe and share this story. Comment one safety step your family uses. Your words may guide another parent or caregiver. Together, awareness becomes prevention, and remembrance becomes the first step toward change. Shaylyn's name endures, not only as a symbol of tragedy, but as a call to protect the most vulnerable among us. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.